the burger of the day?
These are miniature Krabby sliders.
Awesome.
This generation, I'm also a teacher, so I'm kind of I have a lot of friends who are teens. They're extremely smart, and they are extremely resourceful as far as gaining knowledge, and they are extremely aware of the problems with capitalism as it is now. And something that I don't see enough of, and I would love to see more of, and I think that teens are screaming for it, is content that directly challenges capitalism, and not in a metaphorical way, like the way the Hunger Games does, but actually shows like take up arms against capitalism and defeat your oppressors, as in how things are now. And so I think if you are looking for more content that teens will love and be fully into, I think anything related to anarchism, defeating capitalism, defeating white supremacy, confronting colonialism, because the kids like know all about this stuff and are making amazing content on TikTok about it. And anything related to like empowering your identities, like acknowledging all the nuances of queer and gender identities and sexual identities and disability and acknowledging disability and all of that. I think teens love it. What do you guys think?
I feel like, okay, so I'm gonna say something that's gonna be really controversial, especially because I'm looking around right now, and I'm noticing a trend in this room, but I will say, as the accidental token person of color on this panel, I have to say, like, I know, I just, we are supposed to be two others in the conversation, but rarely will you find true, forward, radical activism that is not first and foremost led by people of color, namely Black people, but people of color. And I say this because I think a lot of people want to embrace radicalism and they want to embrace justice, and they think, let me look at like the bigger names who are speaking on this, let me look at the people who are like, you know, are the loudest or the most vocal or given the most platform. And what they miss is that before these white names take the forefront on these issues, there have been people of color leading these issues for decades. And you know, and like, I am not from like the current teen generation, I'm not the TikTok generation, but I am of the social media generation. I grew up on Instagram, I grew up on Twitter, like, and I can tell you that like the one thing that has been consistent since I was a small child is that every time media tries to portray activism and forward motion, there's always a white lead at the forefront. Mm-hmm. And it's never rung true for me. Because I find that in my communities, I'll see people arguing about these issues for decades before they ever get mainstream traction from white leaders, and that's the only time you see these issues brought up. And same thing, like a show that I think about a lot is the Marvel's The Runaways. And like there was one character who was supposed to be like the social justice activist, and she was a white girl, and she came off so preachy, and she didn't even understand the root issues behind the things she was arguing for. And I feel like that's what we see a lot in media, is this white lead who doesn't understand what the root causes of these issues are, arguing in a very empty way. And I think that's why it doesn't ring true for teens, and I think that's why they don't know how to make anything out of this, because we're not giving them the real strong, solid, actual foundation behind these issues. So if I were to say anything as far as like how to make these issues so that teens can like understand them and grow from them and really learn from them and embrace like, you know, that understanding, that radicalism, that forward motion, I would say that you need to first and foremost find the people who started these movements, the people who are really at the core of these movements, and make sure that they're getting like the stage time and they're being given like the spotlight on these things, because teens will know when what you're putting in front of them is fake. Like, they have seen so many perspectives their whole lives. They've been on the internet their whole lives. They know how to spot something that's artificially fabricated to support capitalism. So what you need to do first and foremost is find the true, authentic voices behind these things and let them see that instead.
Brilliant.
What I'm clear about with the Don't Say Gay bill is it's not just about what you can and can't say in the classroom. It is part of targeted legislation that is specifically going after trans people, and it is part of a very disturbing pattern in this country of legislation that is going after transgender children, who are some of the most vulnerable children in our country. And I remember growing up as a transgender child, I did not know what the word trans meant. I remember seeing this medical documentary, because when I was a child I wanted to be a doctor. And so I saw this documentary about people who got sex change surgery, and it was so alienated and scary in the way it was portrayed to me. I was like, I don't want to be this, because this seems so awful and stigmatized. And then, but throughout high school, I struggled so much with my mental health and my self-image. And it was only once I got to college and I met other trans people and I began to have words for the things I've had experienced all my life that I was able to develop my mental health and my self-esteem and to really grow into myself. And this is what politicians across the country want to do to trans children, because we are seeing a place, because of the internet, because of social media, young people have access to the words that even 5-10 years ago they didn't, to describe their identities, and they are becoming healthy and they are becoming themselves. And there is a very dangerous movement in this country that seeks to push those children back into the closet and does not care if they suffer mental health consequences, and does not, and this is going to be dark, but does not care if those children harm or even kill themselves, because in many, especially very religious or very conservative families, it is considered better to have a dead child than a living transgender child.
Mm-hmm.
I've been holding that back for a while.
Yeah, I'm like flustered, but it's not going to, no. We are not gonna allow the don't say thing. It's not gonna happen, we're not gonna allow it. I mean, that they are trying with every last little breath to fight the wave of social change that's happening. And this generation is not gonna allow it to happen. They will fight it, we'll win, we'll defeat it. It's not going to happen. And it's terrible, and these people who are doing this are going to be defeated in every possible way. And they're going to be remembered as being on the wrong side of history, just like the ideology that's come many times before. They will absolutely be defeated.
Something I want to add to, like, as a queer person of color from the state of Florida, the first thing that I noticed when I moved to California is that most people here seem to think that Florida is a conservative state. It is not a conservative state, it's a swing state. So the state itself has voted conservatively in the past few elections, and that's been because of gerrymandering and voter suppression. If you gave Floridians the chance to vote for themselves, they would vote in favor of liberalism, and I know this from experience. Most people I encounter in Florida are extremely liberal, and honestly, it's nothing but a hostage situation that people in Florida are experiencing what they're experiencing right now. I think it's really important. A lot of people, I think, in liberal states, we get comfortable and we think, well, it would never happen here, so why does it matter? And I think what we don't realize is how many innocent people are, potentially going to be in a situation where they're trans, they can't transition, queer kids who are going to die in high school, and all of these things that are like, they may seem distant from us right now because we're in California, but when you go to Florida, there are so many people who don't want this, and they just don't have a choice. And so I think that, we all know how horrible this legislation is, and I think we all can sit here and be like, yeah, this legislation is so bad, it's so bad. But I don't think it impacts us directly, and I think that means that sometimes we can get complacent, but I think it's important to remember that, everywhere in this country, everywhere in this world, people are people, and what those people are suffering, even if it is not our direct problem, it's still something that we should be aware of, and it's something that we should care about, and it's something we should do our best to lend a hand to.
Being liberal doesn't mean, is not being on the left at this point. It's not being progressive, and a lot of what the Democratic Party does is, almost supporting the status quo, whereas then conservative is pushing more. So instead of being here, we're being like here. And I think understanding that terminology and not being satisfied with it, which is very difficult because there are times where I'm like, I'm not satisfied, but I don't know what to do. And feel very overwhelmed by, well, there's two major parties. That doesn't have to be the case, but it does take change.
Yeah, like I think I would add to like, so I did say liberal in terms of like Florida like voters, and I meant liberal. I wouldn't necessarily say that I think Florida is full of like overwhelming numbers of like radical leftists. But I also don't think most of the United States is. I think even in California we like to pride ourselves on being leftist.
And we have so many right-wing extremists here that it's not even funny. I don't know why people don't know this.
Yeah,
Daily Stormer was birthed in Santa Monica.
And it's like, and the thing is, I think ultimately, it's like, I feel like there's this pride divide where we have a tendency to like try to box people into like these broad concepts of like liberal versus conservative so that we can feel better knowing that we're not on the side of those worst people. And I think that's like a very common like sentimentality. Like I don't even identify as like liberal, and I think it's largely because there are so many liberals who would happily have me killed as a black trans person. And I think that that's just also something to keep in mind. But I do think that teens in general, like, and not even just teens, but I think anyone born like post like 94 is like very in tune to like terms and being aware of terminology and like really understanding like that words mean something. I feel like that's been, and I think it's because of like the advent of just growing up around the internet and always having access to like definitions and finding the right term. But yeah, I think there's definitely a like difference between like liberal and leftist and just the whole like spectrum of like politics. And I think ultimately like it's just so hard to find people who are truly like on the left, like as that it becomes really hard to see where those lines actually lay, because what most people consider to be like liberalism and like conservatism is just not actually within those parameters.
R2.
Oh man.
Hi.
Right now, we're gonna keep this groove. Here we go, to the right, y'all.